Well, hello, little one. Oh, Ma, so glad you're back. You ready to hear some more of the story of Hitty, Her First 100 Years by Rachel Field? Let's see what adventures she goes on for this time. Sit back, snuggle up, and close your eyes and just listen to the rocking chair, listen to the fire, listen to Oma read the story about Hitty. Chapter 11, in which I sit for my daguerreotype and meet a poet. There are two events of that time that stand out with particular clearness. The first was when Clarissa's grandfather decided that he wanted to have her daguerreotype taken. This was a form of photography very popular at that time, and indeed one to which I am to this day very partial. These pictures were taken with a camera on small glass plates, which were later colored appropriately and fixed in miniature black cases with red plush and gold leaf borders inside. Ruth had hers done on her 18th birthday, and I have no doubt Clarissa would have had to wait as long for hers had her grandfather not intervened. He had a special affection in his heart for Clarissa because she resembled a little sister of his who had died many years before. She, too, had been named Clarissa, and Grandfather Price had a beautiful little miniature of her in a locket which he sometimes showed us when Clarissa took me to his big house for first-day dinner. He wanted one of his grandchild at the same age. So, one day, Clarissa was dressed in her best, a brown cashmere this time, for the gray merino was never quite what it had been before the Patty concert, and off we went to the daguerreotype artist's studio. Clarissa's grandfather was a kindly and talkative old gentleman, and we kept meeting so many people he knew along the way that it seemed we should never get to the place before the sun went down. However, we managed to, and soon we were opening one small case after another, while the artist showed us all the different ways he could pose his subjects. Fortunately, Clarissa was a quiet child, who minded less than most the moments of sitting perfectly still without moving so much as an eyelash. As for me, this was no hardship at all. I pictured how fine it would be to see myself against the crimson cloth that covered a small table upon which Clarissa rested the hand that held me. I could hardly wait to see the finished pictures when we went a few days later to call for them. The artist wished to see Clarissa again before he put in the color, as Grandfather Price impressed upon him the importance of making her hair and eyes the right shade and not putting it too much pink on her cheeks. Well, you can imagine my feelings when the pictures were shown and it turned out that I did not appear in them at all. The plates all ended before I began. It was very disappointing, and nothing could make Clarissa resign to it. I wanted Hitty to be in it too, was all she would say over and over. In vain the artist tried to explain, and her grandfather to reason with her. They were such excellent likenesses of her, it seemed doubtful if the artist could do so well again. Finally, he had an idea. "Since it is my fault," he said, bowing in a queer foreign way he had, "that mademoiselle, that your granddaughter is not satisfied, perhaps she will permit the doll to sit for me alone." Clarissa was enchanted, and I felt myself almost overpowered by the honor. It was lucky that my pleasant expression was so firmly fixed, as otherwise I think I might not have managed to keep it during the ordeal. The artist took as much pains with me as if I had been one of his most distinguished subjects. Unfortunately, I was not wearing my best clothes this second time. But Clarissa hovered over me, arranging my skirts and pulling out my beads, while the artist brought out a tiny jug with roses on it and some orange berries to put behind me. These were very like mountain ash berries, and I consider it a most fortunate coincidence that they were to be in my background. They set off her brunette type charmingly, said the artist as he peered through his camera box on its 3 legs. "What is it that you call her, mademoiselle?" So Clarissa told him my name, and that I had come from the inside of a horsehair sofa and had been to hear Adelina Patti sing. "Experience as well as character," said the artist. "Ah, yes, it is easily seen that she has both. I shall try to do her justice." Then he put his head under a black cloth and slid a plate into the box. "Now, Mademoiselle Hitty," he said from under the black folds, "I shall have to request that you keep perfectly still for one moment, and a pleasant expression, if you please." Well, no sitter could have been more obliging than I. He seemed appreciative of this and told Clarissa and her grandfather that he could not have asked for a better subject. "She shall come with the others tomorrow," he promised as he bowed us out, "to Mademoiselle with my compliments." He was as good as his word. The next night, Grandfather Price came over after supper with the pictures in a packet. He was smiling so broadly that I knew he was pleased with them, and all the family gathered round to pass judgment. Clarissa's were pronounced excellent likenesses, but as for mine, it had turned out so well that it had to be passed round and round and the case opened and closed so many times I was afraid it would be worn out the very first evening. I could hardly believe my eyes when I saw myself there in the gilt-edged oval, my buff-sprigged skirts neatly spread about me, a scallop or two of petticoats showing beneath my feet, and hands as wooden as life, and my expression as pleasant as the day the old peddler had given it to me so long ago in Maine. Best of all, the artist had touched the flowers on the mug with pink, and the berries with green and orange, while my corals were as bright as I could wish. I often wonder what has become of that daguerreotype. Miss Hunter would certainly carry on if she ever saw it. Even then, before I was considered an antique and people began collecting daguerreotypes, it was displayed as a great curiosity. Dolls had been taken in them, of course, but always with their young mistresses. I have yet to hear of one sitting alone for her portrait. The next most important event which I recall of this time was the visit of Mr. John Greenleaf Whittier, the poet. He was already a familiar name in the Price household, being the most famous Quaker of his day, as well as a friend of the family. The occasion of his coming was that he was to read a poem at a large meeting which held to protest against slavery. Like nearly all Quakers, the Prices felt that all the slaves in the South should be freed. They read a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin aloud, and I must say that what I heard of it did upset me a good deal, especially the part about whippings and when bloodhounds chased poor Eliza over the ice cakes. Indeed, this chapter so affected Clarissa's tender heart that her mother said it was better for her not to hear any more, since it kept them up nights trying to console the child for her bad dreams. To this day, I do not know exactly what all the trouble was about, but I do know that the meeting was to be very important and that Grandfather Price was to introduce the poet. He thought it would be nice for Clarissa to learn one of his poems to say to him. I could not help feeling that a poet might like to hear some other poem instead, since from what I heard, I gathered that it is quite hard work to make the right words rhyme when they should. But of course, I had nothing to say about it, and Clarissa was set down to memorize one called Telling the Bees. It had some quite pretty parts, but I thought it had a sad song for a little girl to learn, because it was about a man coming back to a farmhouse and finding that the lady he loved had died, and the chore girl was draping all the beehives in crape and singing. But Clarissa was very conscientious, and by the day he was to arrive, she knew all the verses by heart. From a second-story window, Clarissa and I saw Mr. Whittier drive up. Her father and grandfather were showing him up the steps. I cannot say that there was anything about him to make you know he was a poet. I had on my gray dress in his honor, and when Ruth came to fetch us down to the parlor, I must confess to several shivers in my pegs. But Mr. Whittier proved to be a thin, very kindly man. He did not talk in rhymes, as I had feared he might, and he smiled as often as anybody else behind his grayish beard. Clarissa said the bee poem through right away as soon as they had shaken hands. He listened to it very carefully and thanked her when she had finished. "Thee has a sweet voice, my dear," he said. "May thee never have cause to raise it in protest." I was just beginning to feel rather left out of the conversation when Mr. Whittier caught sight of me. Clarissa needed no further encouragement. Soon she was running off to get my daguerreotype, leaving me on the poet's knee. The fact that I was in Quaker dress pleased him. He examined me with grave pleasure. He listened, too, to all that Clarissa could tell him of my history. Hitty, he repeated thoughtfully after her. A plain name, but not without charm. He also remarked that he had never seen a more tranquil brow than mine. He would have said more, perhaps, had they not been summoned to supper. Clarissa and I were not allowed to go to the meeting, as were Ruth and William. I think Mr. Whittier must have felt sorry about this. At all events, upon parting next day, he left a folded piece of paper in Clarissa's hands. When this was read, it proved to be a poem written in the poet's own hand and about me. It was called, if I remember rightly, Lines to a Quaker Doll of Philadelphia, and it began in the following manner. These verses are in praise of thee, thou finger's length of modesty, whose tranquil brow and dress of gray become thee more than bright array. I am sorry I cannot remember it all, for even Mr. and Mrs. Price were impressed. They kept it in the parlor, what not along with my daguerreotype. I wish I knew what has become of it. I fear it must have been lost, since it never seems to be mentioned, not even in the complete poems of Mr. John Greenleaf Whittier. And now comes a time that is strange to remember, in which things became so confused in my memory that I scarcely know what to say of it. I do not know when I began to hear about soldiers and fighting and speeches by a man named Abraham Lincoln, who was called president. To this day, I am not clear what it was all about, only I know that Uncle Tom's Cabin and Topsy and Ava and the Bloodhounds were all mixed up in it, and that the Price family wore very long faces and went to more meetings than before. Quakers did not believe that anything was worth killing other people about. Still, they said they believed Mr. Lincoln was right in holding that the Southern states had no right to set up a government of their own. Quite well do I remember the day old Grandfather Price walked in with a very grave face and his cane shaking in his hand. "Sarah," he said to Clarissa's mother, who met him in the hall, "it has come to war." From my place on the windowsill where I had been left, I heard him say it, and saw the tears roll down his cheeks as he read her the call for volunteers. After that, there was a different air about the whole city, and though I lived in a Quaker household, which was not sending men away to fight, still, we all felt it too. Many a time I have sat on the front steps or looked from a window with Clarissa as long blue lines of men marched by, muskets on their shoulders, packs on their backs, and their feet all moving together like the spokes of wheels, till it made one dizzy to look. Sometimes Paul Schneider came and sat beside Clarissa on our steps and told her which regiments they were and where they had come from. Once he read off a name that startled me. "Look," he said, pointing to the letters on a flag, "the 12th Maine Infantry Division. They've come a long way." I thought of the Preble House on the road between Bath and Portland, and I knew better than any just how far they had come. Ruth felt more interest in those from nearby. Many of the boys she knew were training in camp. She used to knit socks and write letters to those she knew best. There was one, a pleasant, round-faced fellow named John Norton, who sent her a button from his first uniform and also his picture, a funny little tin-type affair. I noticed that she treasured both very carefully. Ruth was graver and quieter than she had been a year ago, and no wonder, for before very long it turned out that she had promised John Norton to marry him when he came back from fighting with General McClellan. When she wasn't around, her father and mother discussed it very soberly and told each other she would be lucky if young Norton ever came back alive. As time went on, and the papers kept printing lists of men who had been killed, and news about campaigns and charges and camps, I found Clarissa paid less attention to me than of old. It was not that she wasn't still fond of me, but like the older members of the family, she must help in all sorts of ways she had not known before. Several of the servants were dismissed. There was more sewing and housework to be done, and in odd moments each evening all the women would gather and scrape lint from the cotton which was to make bandages for the wounded. It was not the easiest work. Fingers became stiff and sore in a very short time. I sat in my little house on a corner of the living room mantelpiece and watched them at it. It seemed too bad that I could not help too. My wooden hands would have proved excellent in the scraping line, not nearly so easily tired as Clarissa's, but no one thought to set me at it. Now, the two youngest boys played at soldiers all day in the yard, and no one in the family thought to reprove them. Will declared he would run away and join a regiment as soon as he was a year older. Ruth's cheeks were not so red as they had been. She spent all her time scraping lint and rolling bandages and waiting for letters from the front. One day she got one that said that John Norton was seriously wounded from a shot in the leg. Clarissa told Paul and all the children in the neighborhood about it. He'll walk mit a wooden leg when he come back, said Paul. Maybe he won't ever come back, said Clarissa. She wears the button he gave her on a ribbon around her neck, and she sleeps with his tintype under her pillow. I saw her put it there the other night. Well, so she should, declared Paul. She has promised she will marry him. As time went on, I came more and more to look on at the doings of the Price household rather than to take part in them. Clarissa gave away the rag and china babies, but she kept me, even though she declared she was 12 now and too old for dolls. I lost track of time, and the sound of drums and fifes in the street outside stirred me no more than the ticking of the clock in the hall. I told myself that when the war was over, everything would be as it had been before. But I knew better than to believe this, for a doll of my experience has learned that nothing can ever be just the same once there has been a change of any sort. A letter came one day from John Norton, who was better and being cared for in a southern hospital. There is a little girl here who brings me flowers sometimes, he wrote Ruth. She is a year or two younger than Clarissa, and she has a doll with a cloth head because the china one got shot away when her house was under fire. Her name is Camilla Calhoun, and she likes to have me tell her about Clarissa's doll Hitty. Today she brought me a jasmine flower and said, send it to the Yankee doll. So here it is. And it actually was in the letter, though nothing more than a flat, brownish crumple of leaves. Clarissa didn't seem very much pleased at first. I don't want her sending Hitty flowers, she said. Hush, said her mother. Thee must love thy enemies. It was a kind thought, and thee has not suffered as that poor child has in this terrible war. As for Ruth, she would have liked nothing better than to pack me off then and there to that little southern girl who had been kind to John Norton. I felt relieved that the mails were too uncertain for this, as I had no wish to find myself under fire.